Hello everyone and good evening. I hope you're all doing well today. Welcome to Terminator Dark Fate Defiance Spotlight number 1. So this is going to be the first in a series of both streams as well as articles which are going to be uploaded to the Slytherin website, where we're going to be exploring some of the features of Terminator Dark Fate Defiance. So this first one, strategic gameplay, is going to be covering many of the aspects which you'll need to deal with over the course of the Terminator Dark Fate Defiance campaign, as you deal with managing the various aspects of T-Force and what you should maybe keep an eye out for in terms of informing your decision making over the course of a campaign. Let's get this show on the road, shall we? So I do have a couple of saves here, including a risk save from not too long back when I was playing on stream as well. So we're going to load this up. So this is pretty early in the game, so we have a couple of bits to look at. So we've just completed the first mission after the 3 tutorial missions as well. So we have managed to help out at Abiquiu, and we need to take a look at our force here. So during Dark Fate Defiance, what you'll be doing is managing your army. Your army is persistent from mission to mission, and you have many different units you'll be managing, from infantry to specialized heavy weapon teams, tanks, IFVs, lighter vehicles like Humvees, to just stuff like trucks, light transports which you can utilize to ferry your troops around the battlefield, turrets, light platforms which can be upgraded over time with additional equipment. And later on in the campaign, other types of weaponry too: helicopters, artillery pieces, rocket artillery. There is a wide variety of equipment which you'll be able to both salvage from the battlefield as well as trade for over the course of the campaign. So we're just going to go over a few things here. So early on in the campaign, you'll be starting with a few different founder squads. So there are a few different factions in the game. Typically, early on, it's mostly going to be founders and movement forces which you'll be utilising as you prosecute your fight against the Legion. This is in the post-mission screen. We have a little bit of recovering to do. We did take some losses in the previous engagement, and we'll go over how you restore forces back to full strength, what considerations you should take into account when you're actually replenishing your force, and the various types of resources which you'll need to manage over time. So let's take a look at one of our normal squads here. So this is a Founders Infantry squad, the backbone of your infantry force, and overall a very valuable asset to have under your command. This one is quite an experienced group of infantry at this stage. It has taken quite a lot of Legion forces on and managed to succeed. Due to that, it has been rewarded with quite a bit of veterancy, which we can award out, and we'll go through that system in a minute as well. It's currently equipped with one of the more advanced weapons variants, which is the NGSWR Advanced Assault Rifle. So this is kind of like a mid-tier upgrade. Early on, you're only going to have a couple of these around, but over the course of the campaign, you'll find plenty of these to outfit your infantry with. And the Founders aren't the only ones who can use these. Militia for movements can as well. But this particular Founders unit starts with the NGSW and has an SMOR. So the SMOR is a quite nice, almost like an emergency anti-tank. Realistically, this is more meant for dealing with lighter vehicles. It can deal damage to heavier targets, but you're really going to have to hope that you're either lucky or you go for flanking shots, hit on the side and rear. Typically, you're going to be wanting to rely on your heavier anti-tank assets. Your portable ATGMs, in particular, are excellent for taking out any harder targets you may encounter. And one of the key aspects of the Terminator Dark Fate Defiance campaign is that you're going to need to make sure that you bring the right tools for the job. And your tools, it's a persistent campaign. Your tools, you need to keep them alive. T-Force only has a limited amount of manpower to draw upon, and if you take losses, you're going to have to replenish your squads over time. So just to go back to this infantry squad, we can see it has taken 1 loss here. We do want to bring it back to full combat effectiveness, which we're going to do by pressing the restore button here. So what this does is it uses your available manpower to replenish the squad. Now, manpower is a finite asset. You only have a limited amount of it. Now, there's a couple of ways which you can earn more manpower. Sometimes between missions, you get the occasional decision to earn some more manpower. You can disband other squads in order to free up manpower to then be assigned to the squads you want them to. Or you can hire some additional troops from the various settlements and allies you may encounter over the course of a campaign, and disband rows instead to once again get additional manpower. Well, finally, you can hire more manpower from settlements as well. So there's a few ways to gain it. You can track it up at the top right here. It's this green icon. It's an important resource. It's a very important resource, especially if you're working with an army which ends up taking a lot of losses, because there's a couple of ways you can play Terminator, depending on how you outfit your forces. So if you're going for a force which has a lot of vehicles, but not necessarily too much infantry to support it, you might be okay on manpower, but you may be struggling with supplies. Vehicles, as we scroll up here, have a rather large supply cost in comparison to, say, just this infantry squad here. A Founders Infantry squad is over 1,000 supplies, just over, in order to keep them in the field, whereas a Bradley IFV is 3,000 supplies for the vehicle, and then let's say another 600 for the crew as well. So these are all considerations to take into mind, because as well as manpower, you're also going to need to keep an eye on your supply resources over a campaign. Now, supply it's the most important resource in the game. All three are important, but supply even more so. Without supplies, you can't manage to reach where the next mission is. You can't manage to replenish your soldiers' ammunition and make sure they can keep shooting at Legion and the other enemies you may encounter. So supply is an incredibly important resource. Once again, there are a few ways to get it. You can... I think one of the most important ways is selling equipment to traders at settlements. So we'll circle back to that a little bit later on what one of the best tactics is. But selling equipment to traders, making sure that you can buy some additional supply from the various settlements you've gone to as well, and decisions between missions. So there are a few ways. Every unit which you have in your force affects supply, so you need to decide what are you going to allocate your supply to, and how bare bones are you going to run your force. Are you going to go for as large a force possible but really run the ragged edge with how many supplies you have getting from mission to mission, or are you going to go for quite a lean force where maybe you go for the most technologically advanced units possible but you don't have many of them, with the cost that you've got plenty of supplies hopefully, but you might not have the number of forces you need to potentially win some of your missions. So the type of units in the game and the origin faction does have an impact. So if we go look at a militia squad, for example, which is the movement infantry squad, so these are civilians who have managed to survive into the apocalypse, but they're not ex-military or anything like that. These are just civilians pressed into frontline service, basically. They're literally fighting for their lives. And this very much shows in-game. So militia have more squad members than the equivalent Founders Infantry squad, but they typically have worse weaponry. And on top of that, they're not as well armoured, they don't have as much health. And although over time, with Veterancy, these can become a very capable squad in their own right, typically in most combat circumstances, a militia squad is not going to perform quite as well as a Founders Infantry squad. However, it does come with the benefit that they are much cheaper in terms of supply consumption. So this is something which is very much worth taking into account. Are you just going to run a Founders force where you don't take any movement troops on, but it's going to be expensive in terms of individual supply per unit? Or are you going to go for a mixed force where you have basically a bit of each faction, and you'll be able to hire other types of forces over the course of a campaign as well, or salvage their equipment. So it's not just the Founders and Movement which you'll be encountering, but all have their benefits and drawbacks, and from supply usage to individual combat performance of the various types of troops in the game, whether it be infantry or vehicles, armoured support, etc. These are all considerations which need to be taken into account, and it's extremely important in between missions to make sure that you're thinking long term as to what your goal is in terms of your force composition. So there's a lot to think about. I think moving on, we also have, if we go back to the main campaign map here, we also have goodwill points. So this is this purple icon here, the purple pentagon. So goodwill points are generally used for trading, which is an important way to access additional equipment for your troops. And I have two saves here. This is a pretty early game save, and I'll go to a mid game save later on, and we'll go through some of the various equipment which you'll encounter and be able to upgrade your troops with in order to make them more effective. But goodwill points is an important resource to use for generally trading. So we're going to go to the movement support base here. So this is the campaign map. You can decide where you're going to actually send your force to. A consideration to take into account here is that traveling is not free. It does take supplies, and the amount of supplies it takes, currently it's 30,750 a day, as we can see in the top right here. That is all important because if you have a huge force, as we went over a moment ago, it's going to cost more supplies. It's not a fixed cost. How you decide the composition of your force is going to have a huge impact on your supply consumption on a daily basis. So it's important to take that into account. As mentioned, you can get more supplies from various sources, but once again, there's not an infinite amount. Keeping track of your army daily supply consumption is very important. I cannot stress that enough. So let's go to the movement support base here. So as we can see, if you click on the location you want to move to, you can see what you can do at each individual location. So at the movement support base here, we can hire squads, replenish manpower, we can trade, which is what we're going to be covering in a moment, and we can also train squads, whereas at Taos here, or Taos maybe, you can trade only. Now, these are two different factions, the Movement and the Integrators, so they'll have different stockpiles. So it's generally quite helpful to make sure you've got enough supplies to visit as many traders as possible. It gives you more opportunity to browse their wares and potentially find a few upgrades, which will increase the effectiveness of your fighting force. But we're just going to go to the Movement support base here.
Hey,
so,
welcome to our base.
Good to be here. We're
The founder guys who liberated Abiquiu. Commander Kidd told us about you.
good to know we're famous. So what's the situation here?
Well, up until we secured Abiquiu, this was our most northerly outpost. I guess it's more of a rearward staging point now.
Know why I had activity around here?
You mean the machines? No, it's quiet here now. Safe place to rest up and get yourself reprovisioned.
okay, so as you actually move into some locations, you'll speak to the various people there. So if we enter the Movement support base here, we once again see our forces here on the left with the various elements that make up, but we can see the settlement on the right here, and this is the primary way of interacting for trade, supplies, and so on. So this is quite early game. We don't see too many things available really. We've got things like universal junk armor for various vehicles. This slightly increases stats against various types of damage, but it does come with downsides, and that's something you'll need to weigh up when actually organising your force as well. Not all upgrades in the game are always an upgrade in every way. Some of them come with drawbacks. So the universal junk armor here, we can see it increases protection, but only slightly, against all types of damage, but increases the weight of equipment with accompanying disadvantages, has a decrease in dynamic characteristics, off-road capability, and an increase in fuel consumption. So in practice, what that means is it's a little bit slower on the battlefield, and you're going to be having to spend more supplies to refuel it, typically, which for an Abrams is going to be a bit of a problem because it can be expensive to refuel, but for something like a Humvee, it's not quite as much of a problem. This is a very basic armor. You'll come across more advanced versions of both weaponry and armor, as well as other things, over the course of a game. But early on, these are pretty basic things available here. Just very quickly, because I can see a few people in chat. Cliff Booth, Monku Strap, Maladroidit, good to see you all. Maladroidit, thank you very much for that subscription as well. I hope you're all doing well today. So, as well as actually trading for equipment here, which you can purchase using goodwill points, you can also sell any equipment you have spare as well. If you really want to, for example, if I go down to, say, this Humvee here, I can strip equipment off it and sell it for additional goodwill points, which is quite useful at times if you really need the additional goodwill points, but typically you're not probably going to want to do that until you've got an outright upgrade. So later in the game, as you replace some of the earlier weaponry you use with more advanced variants, you may want to sell these for additional goodwill points. That being said, most of the weaponry in the game is useful throughout the game. Things like the RPG 7s do become outdated pretty quickly. The S-More is generally just a straight upgrade. But something like this mounted minigun on the Humvee is very effective even later in the game against infantry. So, like the more advanced variants could have more damage, sure, but they could have drawbacks such as less range. So some of the things you're going to want to keep an eye out on are making sure that you balance the various characteristics of the weaponry and the equipment you find. There's very few straight upgrades, and that's again part of the decision making which you'll be making over the course of a campaign, as well as deciding the composition of your force, what sort of upgrades they're going to get, and finally, I suppose you're also going to want to decide who you're going to be selling and keeping. There's a lot to take into account from a strategic perspective, because it's important for T-Force. If you want to be able to keep going moving forward, your best chance of success is if you're well supplied. If you burn too many supplies, you're going to be having troubles. If you don't have the equipment you need in terms of weapon upgrades and so on, then you could also be in trouble. You might not be able to take out that Legion tank as quickly as you would like if you've not managed to trade or salvage for maybe a heavy plasma cannon for your Abrams. So there's a lot of considerations to take into account, and I feel that one of the most fun aspects for me is just watching your force start from this ragtag scratch group that's managed to just about escape from Haven in the tutorial, and over time build it up to a force which can take on Legion toe-to-toe. And I'll go over some particular strategies later on which will help you do that. But hey Steve, good to see you too. Alright, so after looking at the shop here, we have a few, once again, basic upgrades, things like the 40mm grenade launchers, things like M4 assault rifles. The 40mm grenade launcher is an interesting weapon, so that could be mounted on some of our vehicles or given to a heavy weapons squad. But typically you're probably going to want to mount this on a vehicle. And another consideration to make is, if your force has plenty of anti-infantry firepower, are you making sure to bring weaponry to deal with the vehicles, and vice versa? Because it can be very easy just to stack up the big killy things, again, like the heavy plasma cannons, which are great at dealing with enemy tanks and vehicles and so on, but aren't necessarily too effective against infantry squads. So making sure to bring a balanced amount of firepower to deal with the various threats you'll face on the battlefield is key. So another consideration to take into account there. Strategy, that's madness, sir. Of course, Monku. So next up is the hiring portion of the settlement. So over the course of a campaign, you'll encounter various settlements and traders with which you can deal with. And many of the settlements will allow you to hire additional squads. Squads you might not be able to get otherwise. So we can see we have a few things available here. We have a very tasty heavy platform which we can purchase. This would need to be towed by a main tractor, which again, a consideration to take into account is if you're taking your logistics with you, which you're going to need to, things like supply trailers, fuel tankers. This is a self-propelled fuel tanker here, the Hempt, but you can find fuel trailers out there as well, and additional supply trailers. You're gonna need to make sure that these are actually being actually attached to a tractor to take them everywhere. So as well as managing your frontline combat force, you're gonna need to make sure you bring plenty of logistics with you. Now typically a lot of these can be salvaged on the battlefield, but you may need to purchase some as well. So just diving in and bringing all the tanks you can, but neglecting the logistics may be a bit of a problem for you in the long term. So another consideration to take there. But if we go through, we've got technicals, we've got heavy weapon teams, we've got RPG squads, we've got militias and technicians. So various types of units, as well as guerrillas. And these are a very, very fun unit to use. because they get access to C4. So I'll go over these specifically in a little bit, but these can be a very nasty unit to use. So everything here, from the vehicles to the infantry, has an associated cost in goodwill points. We have a lot of goodwill points here, and an individual squad isn't too expensive, but these are like gold dust. If you're very good at salvaging equipment and selling it, then over the course of the game you might be okay for goodwill, but you can find yourself burning through these very quickly, and you'll miss out on a few things if you don't have enough goodwill points. But it's up to you. That's one of the very good things about Terminator, in which you'll need to carefully manage your various resources. I mentioned supplies is probably the most important, but that does not negate how important both goodwill and manpower is. The hiring hall basically in the various settlements, very helpful to use. And then we have the supplies section. So an additional usage of your goodwill points is to purchase additional supplies. And this is probably what you'll be doing most of the time with your goodwill. It's an extremely effective way of making sure you've got enough supplies, but it can be very expensive in your goodwill points. The good thing is, if you are running a little bit low, but you can make it to the next settlement, you can just exchange your goodwill points for either manpower directly or supplies. Do you risk burning through all your goodwill points in order to make sure you got plenty of supplies spare? Do you not spend your goodwill points, but you're running once again on the ragged edge with your supply usage? Do you then disband a few units or sell them in order to try and bring your supply usage down? It's all considerations you'll need to take over the course of the campaign in Terminator Defiance. So it's the key aspect is managing your various resources outside of battle, as well as managing T-Force inside a battle. They complement each other very well, and they'll affect each other quite a lot. More than most battles, you'll see the effects of your decision outside of a battle. It'll have an impact in a battle in various ways. So, as well as this then, I think what we're going to do here is go look at Taos, which is the Integrators trading post, which is one of the other
Hey, are you guys
factions.
leaving? Good luck.
Let's just skip through
Welcome
this.
to our camp.
We can...
What do you have to offer? We're heading. We want to reach.
Someone stop. It is distract.
We'll see what we.
Alright, so let's speak to the Integrators very quickly here. So the Integrators are another faction which you're not particularly friendly with, at least at the start. Over the course of the campaign, though, they do offer some very powerful upgrades to your force, and you'll have a few missions involving them. But for spoiler purposes, I won't go too much into them here. So we can see that they have a different stash of equipment to trade with us here. Some of them being quite expensive because they are very, very good. So, for example, the Bradley Tow ATGM launcher. This is probably one of the things you should always buy if you see one. It just increases your lethality of your Bradley by an extreme margin. The autocannon, which you start with on the Bradley, is fine. It can do some work, but the ATGM just gives you an additional tactical option, which is incredibly helpful. And your Bradley is a lot more survivable on the battlefield as a unit compared to, say, your ATGM squad. So it's extremely helpful to have this as an option here. So if we purchase the Bradley's tow ATGM here, attach it to the unit. This brings us to other considerations you'll need to take in between missions. So, attaching the ATGM here has actually made it so we need to replenish its ammo. Ammunition and fuel are both persistent, both in and out of missions. So if you have used something like a Humvee, you've zoomed around the battlefield several times, you've burned through all of your fuel, you're almost out at the end of the mission, you manage to finish your mission, you extract, but you haven't resupplied the fuel in mission. Once you get back into the campaign screen, managing your army, it's still going to be low on fuel. You need to make sure that you replenish those fuel levels. And the same is true for both spare parts, which you utilize in mission to repair damage, which any vehicle has accrued, as long as it's not outright destroyed, as well as ammunition supplies. Some weaponry, stuff like the rotary weapons, the rotary 20 mils, they do have a habit of burning through ammunition quite quickly. Whereas something like a tank cannon probably isn't going to burn through it quite as quickly. Its rate of fire isn't prodigious. But all of these, they cost supplies in order to replenish. And any damage which the vehicle still has once you leave a mission is still there as well. And any crew members you've lost, because all vehicles in the game are crewed by an individual squad, will also need to be replenished. So if you're Abrams, if the gunner of the machine gun on the top, the pintle mounted 50 cal to start off with at least, if they've been eliminated, or additional crewmen on top of that, you're going to need to make sure that you replenish the crew to bring it back to full effectiveness. Otherwise, you're going to be having drawbacks in combat. Your machine gunner dies, for example, in the Abrams, it's not going to be shooting the machine gun anymore. So more things to take into account over time in order to make sure you're running at full combat effectiveness. Now, weaponry can be swapped between units here, and the act of changing weaponry does have a bit of an impact on making sure that you're replenishing your troops. So let's look at Kondo's squad. So Kondo starts with 2 laser sniper rifles. It's quite a strong sniper squad. It's the hero sniper squad you'll be encountering in the first mission after the tutorials. So these are a very powerful later game sniper rifle. You don't get many of them, but they're a very effective weapon. Even against things like light vehicles, these can do a little bit of damage. We can see that he has 96 out of 100, this particular squad, in terms of rounds for the sniper rifles. If I take the laser sniper rifle off, what this is going to do is it's going to change his sniper rifle to the default M2010, which uses a different ammunition type. In this case, 300 Winchester Magnum. Now, this has an impact because I need to replenish that ammunition type, and it's going to cost me a little bit more in order to do so. For infantry squads, it's probably not going to take too much in terms of supplies. But for something like a vehicle, if you're changing the weaponry on that, it's going to be more expensive. So a little bit of a tip there. When you're swapping weaponry around, be very careful and don't mix and match too much. Maybe mentally decide how you want to outfit your squads first. Otherwise, you may end up expending more supplies than you wish, just to make sure everyone's got enough ammunition. Or at the very least, before you actually go around clicking resupply on everyone, make sure you've done all your changes first, as opposed to every time you see a squad empty and you've moved weaponry, you resupply and then you decide, actually I want to change them around again. If you really want to min-max your supplies and max out the most you can for your force, that's quite helpful to do. So, other expensive additions here, we've got things like mounted ATGM launchers, we have the mounted plasma recoilless, plasma assault rifles, We've even got a light howitzer at 105. So there's quite a wide variety of equipment you'll encounter both via salvaging and trading. So, what I'm going to do in a minute is load up my mid-game campaign just to show a bit more of the weaponry available, which you'll see over the course of a game. So, just very quickly, does anyone in chat have any questions? Is there a limit on the number of units you can field? I've not encountered one. If there is one, well, okay. There kind of is. So, when you start a mission, you can only take a limited number of troops in to begin with. And you'll need to decide what your initial starting force is going to consist of. So typically I like bringing in a couple of infantry squads, a heavy vehicle if it allows me to, because sometimes you need to bring in lighter stuff to begin with. But I typically bring a Bradley IFV, a couple of infantry squads, and something like an ATGM squad, so crack open a harder target, at least to begin with. Over the course of a mission, you can bring in additional reinforcements. So it depends on the mission parameters, really, on the setup for that particular mission. But typically you can bring in a very huge force. There probably is a particular limit, but I've never made a force which is large enough which has actually hit that particular limit, because if you it's probably possible there is one, but you're gonna be leaving yourself in a really rough position supply usage wise if you by doing it. So in practice you can get a very large force on the map, and I've not hit any particular wall in that aspect. Do you happen to know when the Astro Military will drop a battle sector? I don't really know, sorry, Baketia. If I knew and was allowed to say, I would, but I don't know, and even if I did, I don't think I'd be allowed to. So I apologise, I don't have a better answer for you on that one. Okay, so in terms of hiring more equipment here, we can see that the integrators also offer a different selection of vehicles, but no infantry. So we have another Bradley on offer. It's quite expensive at almost, well, not far off half our remaining goodwill points. There's also another tractor, which could well be a very good investment, because you'll want tractors in order to, as mentioned, bring supply trailers, fuel trailers, and there's some combat related trailers as well, which could potentially be a good investment. We got M113, Humvee, technical. Now, the capabilities of your vehicles are important. Typically, I prefer a Humvee over a technical, as an example. Even though the Humvee, in this case at least, has a little bit less firepower, but that can be swapped out. The movement vehicles are quite quick. You can strap technical steel armor. The armor upgrades are a bit easier to find, at least early on for these, but they're also easy to blow up. So I tend to quite like the Founders Humvees, and the Founders Humvees are a bit of, one of those units which are, I think, slept on a little bit, and I'll go into my reasoning as why. Yes, they're not an IF3. They can't survive against particularly heavy enemy ordnance, but you can strap some decent armor onto them, and you'll get a couple of options relatively quickly in the campaign. They can have a good wide variety of firepower added on top of them, from this mounted minigun all the way to something like the mounted tow ATGM here. And a mounted tow on top of a Humvee is going to do just as much as the mounted tow on a Bradley. And the tows have such a range that they can stay out of range of enemy targets. They're very good for having a long range, the ATGMs. So Overall, I really like the Humvee as a package. You've got to be very careful with using them. If you do push forward and don't screen for your force and they get ambushed, they're going to go down pretty quickly. But they're more useful than, say, something like an M113. Just because they're a good overall package for speed, weapon variety, in terms of making sure that they have a little bit of survivability to them, but the speed is one of the big upsides to me. They're not the quickest thing in the game, but they have enough. They're not the most armoured thing in the game, but they have enough. And they're not the piece of equipment which is going to have the most firepower in the game, but once again, they have enough. They're just a nice balance overall. But you can do the same sort of things with vans to some degree as well. You can also put a mounted Terminator GM on this, and it has less supply consumption as well. So the wide variety of equipment on offer really does offer you a lot of decisions, both from a strategic and tactical perspectives. Strategic things like supply consumption, tactical in terms of like individual combat performance, but also from it's the apocalypse and it's kind of fun from a roleplay perspective to go running around in pre-war vans and pickup trucks, bolted to the gills with armor and additional firepower, and destroy Legion tanks and warforms. So there's a lot of fun from a roleplay perspective with them as well, I think. So, what is next on the agenda? Right, I think what we're going to do here then is...
These integrator freaks.
We're just going to skip all of this. I'm going to go load a slightly later game save here. So I'm not going to go into too many details as to how we got here for spoiler purposes, but I do want to just go through some later game gear. So at this particular settlement which we're visiting here, we can see that we have a lot more weapon variety, but it's not quite late game. You're not going to see all the fancy stuff yet. We also have just a lot more in terms of quantity as well. If we go look at the hiring screen here, there's a few different types which weren't available previously, including, would you look at that, a helicopter. So, over the course of the game, it's not just going to be infantry and tanks, support teams and so on. You will encounter other types of weaponry in order to enforce combined arms upon the battlefield, and air power is one of them. Artillery is another, which is extremely helpful, as you'll find as you get into the later stages of a campaign. But helicopters are certainly an asset you can use to your advantage. We also have different types of tanks here. I hesitate to use the word tank with a French tank, but there we go. I'm not a fan of French tanks, as anyone who knows all the memes on Slytherin's channel will know. They have tormented me too much. But this is a repurposed French AMX-10, I think, or something similar. So this has a slightly smaller gun. It's going to be using a lot less supplies compared to something like an Abrams, but it also has access to smokes as well, in order to actually try and keep it protected on the battlefield. Activate smokes, retreat slightly, maneuver to a different position, and it's a light tank, so it's a bit quicker as well. The various different bits of equipment you can find will all have benefits and drawbacks. This might not be as outright good at combat in a lot of cases compared to, say, the Abrams, but it has other characteristics which make it quite valuable. As mentioned, the supply consumption being lesser is helpful. We then also have things like Humvee, which has already got some upgrades attached. This one comes with a mounted recoilless rifle as well as Humvee cartel armor, which bulks up its survivability but reduces its maximum speed and increases its fuel consumption. Again, there's as you outfit your troops over time, you'll encounter a lot of upgrades which you'll need to weigh up the pros and cons as to whether it works for you. If we then go look at something like this Integrated Heavy Technical as an example, so this is quite a rare unit, certainly this early in the game. I was very lucky to salvage this. It's quite capable, it has a Legion weaponry attached. However, look at the supply consumption cost. It's very expensive. But it's 2,000 goodwill points I could get if I were to sell the squad, or sell the vehicle. So, if you are short on goodwill points, or you're short on supplies, there are ways and means at settlements in order to deal with those. Same for manpower. Now, another consideration to take into account with manpower is, for all the spare manpower you have, and I did decently well in this campaign, so I've got a lot of spare manpower left because I disbanded a bunch of squads after one of the engagements not long back, just as a bit of a test. But any spare manpower you have is going to take up additional supplies. Now, it's not going to be enough in and of itself to bankrupt you in terms of supplies, but it is going to be an additional strain. So another thing you'll need to take into account over time is making sure that you keep track of your supply usage from various sources, and that's an additional source right there. Make sure to keep an eye on that. So I think a few tips here then, and I'm just going to go through and show a few different upgrades here. So, the Bradley in this case has a light rotary 20mm, which is an upgrade on its initial Bushmaster cannon. This one also has the TOW ATGM. We have a Humvee which has steel armor here, which doesn't quite as much have an impact on the various dynamics, so the fuel consumption or speed, as the cartel armor. So this is kind of like a midway upgrade. Not as much survivability, doesn't have as much of an impact on fuel consumption though. We have a van here which we've outfitted with a TOW ATGM. It has steel armor, it has the gun mount slot with a heavy machine gun. There's a lot of upgrades you can get over time. And we also have some more veteran squads down here. So this particular ATGM squad has been upgraded. They've earned enough experience during combat in order to get a few additions to their repertoire. So they can target enemy aircraft with our ATGMs now, which unlocks an additional type of ammunition. This is extremely helpful. So here we go, man-portable surface-to-air missiles. These normally aren't available. You have to get the Veterancy upgrade to unlock them. We then have things like Weapon Lover, plus 20% to deploying speed. Quite helpful for ATGMs. It can take a while to get the weapon ready to use. Lock it onto target, so it helps with that. And then Survivalist, minus 20% supply consumption. So, if you are struggling with supply problems over the course of the campaign, stacking Survivalists on as many squads as possible is quite helpful. Now, not every squad has the same upgrades. Something like, say, the infantry squad here, which this has quite a few upgrades. This has armoured, so what this gives is plus 20% hit points, but minus 10% speed. If we go look at other additional options here, we could go for something like Rocket Man, which unlocks high explosive ammo for any RPGs the standard infantry squad gets. Very helpful for dealing with enemy units garrisoning buildings, which is something we'll cover in a future spotlight as well. How best to use cover and what sort of an impact it can have on the battlefield. So not every squad has access to the same set of veterancy upgrades. Something like a vehicle crew is going to be very different to something like an infantry squad. An infantry squad is going to be very different to an ATGM squad. So there are a lot of additional unlocks over the course of a campaign, which you'll meet and divvy out to your veterans. So it's a very important part of your persistent army is keeping them alive over time, because if they're effective in combat, they gain veterancy, then that veterancy can be transferred into additional skills, and those skills will make them more effective in combat. So you're going to want to try and keep your troops alive from that perspective as well. It's not just all about keeping the manpower going, it's about maximizing the potential of your troops, and your troops can only do that if they survive. So this particular infantry squad's taken a few losses. It's one of my better squads, so I used it very heavily, chucked it where it was needed. It did take losses because of that, but it has access to a plasma assault rifle, plasma machine gun. So these are some of the fancier infantry upgrades you'll find over the course of a game. Now, even for these, which are extremely good weapons, these do have some drawbacks. Excellent firepower, but reduced range. So consideration to also make there. And the S-More can be improved. There is a better version of an S-More out there. So it's not just the ATGM squads that get anti-tank firepower. There's also a better version of the S-More out there. If we go look at something like a Ranger squad here, oh, would you look at that? We have an S-Roar. So this is the upgraded S-More, but has a significantly reduced stock of shots. So this is quite effective. So more firepower, but the cost is you can't take as many of them on a per squad basis. Alright, so I think we're coming to the end of the stream here. I got about 10-15 minutes or so, but there's a few tips just to help you out on the battlefield. So the first thing is going to be weapon range, I want to mention. So when you're on the campaign map like this, if you hover over whichever weapon is attached to your squad or vehicle, it will tell you what the range of said weapon is. And if you can outrange the enemy and shoot at them, and they can't shoot back, and you can kill them, then it's all the more effective. Typically though, a lot of the more effective weaponry, like the plasma weaponry, will require you to get in a little bit closer, so you are going to put yourself at risk. But things like the ATGMs over here do have a very long range. These are very helpful for dealing with dangerous targets. Legion warforms, things like spiders, Legion heavy tanks, the hunter killers and so on. The ATGMs are typically very effective at dealing with those. And if you can deal with them at a safe distance, which the ATGM has a habit of outranging most projectile-based weaponry, then you can keep your squad safe. You don't have to put them too much at risk. Now, in order to actually spot for the ATGM, however, you're probably, definitely really, going to need to scout for them. Now, there is a couple of options as T-Force for what you could use in order to scout and screen for your force. One of the options is to use a highly camouflaged squad like some snipers. Two-man squads, they are quite hard to see and hit in general because they're well camouflaged. But it's only a two-man squad. If it takes a loss, it's going to be losing 50% of its firepower, and if you're really unlucky, you can lose the full squad quite quickly. Whereas Legion has access to scout drones, which are both quite cheap and quite There's a lot of them out there. Let's just say that Legion has the advantage right now in terms of industrial production. Legion can afford to send plenty of scout drones out to look for you, and they're very effective at doing so. You need to be a little bit more creative as T-Force. So the snipers are an option, but they're quite a valuable squad. Something to consider is the Ranger Squad. So the Ranger Squad has a balanced set of firepower, 3 assault rifles, a marksman rifle, and a grenade launcher. And over time they can also be upgraded. The assault rifles could be replaced with, say, a plasma variant, the sniper rifle with a laser variant, as an example. It's a 5-man squad. If you lose one of your riflemen, it's not too bad, because you've not lost one of your valuable weapons. If you lose the sniper or the 40mm, then one of the other riflemen can pick it up. 5 men is enough firepower in order to tackle many of the lighter sort of enemies you're going to go up against. It has access to a wide variety of firepower via its weapons choices to deal with anti-infantry, at least. And 5 men is quite a lot of survivability in comparison to a 2-man sniper squad as well. Now, Rangers are good, but could it be better? Yes it can. So we spoke about the militia earlier. So the typical militia squad is a 8-man squad, which starts with very limited effectiveness in general. It's not a particularly good frontline combat unit, other than via sheer numbers. However, that also works to your advantage. If you need to push into an area, then maybe send the militia in first to tie up Legion forces or any other enemies you encounter. Make them shoot at the militia instead of the thing that's actually going to kill them. Things like your Founders Infantry or heavy weapon squads, like your vehicles. Your militia are great for both scouting and distraction. It does come with a drawback with this particular tactic. You are going to be expending more manpower replenishing your squads more, most likely. But I think the drawback is generally worth it, because you're keeping your more valuable squads alive and less risk of them being squad wiped. Because if you lose a squad in Terminator, Dark Fate Defiance's campaign, it's gone for good, along with all the veterancy and capabilities that squad has managed to accrue over the course of a campaign. Your army is truly persistent, so risking something like a militia squad is much more acceptable on the odd chance it does get wiped out, as opposed to something like an ATGM squad. So always make sure you're screening for your forces. Use something like a militia squad to scout further forward, garrison them in a building, potentially to look on a particular flank as you push elsewhere, or just send them in front of your forces and see what tries to shoot at them first. By doing so, you're going to avoid nasty ambushes, especially to your vehicles, which if you walk forward and there's a spider with ATGMs attached and it side shots and destroys your Abrams, you're going to be feeling mighty aggrieved, and the tactical circumstances are going to descend into chaos very quickly. Whereas if you've scouted with something like a militia team first, which you can afford to take a few losses on, then it's not as bad. Another thing with the militia is, which I very much recommend doing, if you are doing that with them, give them operational coordination. It increases their squad size by 1, or armoured. And you can actually give operational coordination multiple times, so you can greatly increase the squad size. I think I've managed to get one up to 12 guys, 11. I think it might be 11 guys. That's a big squad. It can take a lot of a pounding before it needs to be rotated. Which brings me to my next suggestion. when you're completing a mission in Terminator, you need to make sure that your troops are going to survive the mission. And one of the best ways to do that is rotate any damaged troops out from the front line, find a safe space on the battlefield behind where you're fighting, retreat your damaged teams to rear, and then replace them with some of your fresher teams. Maybe keep like a reserve or two, like a few squads, just to be able to rotate in order to take a position of one which is really heavily damaged. This has a couple of benefits. One, you should be able to keep your squads fully alive then, i.e. so you can fully replenish them out of battle. And two, it means you're going to be spacing your troops a bit more. If you end up sending all of your forces forward in one big death ball, that's going to be a very attractive target for enemy artillery if it's on the battlefield. So spacing is key as well, and that by rotating damaged forces off the front line, you're probably going to be spaced out a little bit better, and making sure that you're keeping your forces alive, because keeping your army going moving forward is extremely important, and you're going to want veterans to do that. Making sure your veteran squads survive, and a very important piece of the puzzle in order to actually defeat Legion. So we spoke about trading for additional equipment. Now, the other way is to salvage equipment off the battlefield. And this applies to both full vehicles and individual pieces of equipment you'll see here and there, like assault rifles. If you damage an enemy vehicle and force them to bail out, this applies to factions other than Legion. But if you force them to bail out, maybe try to be careful on firing much ordnance near that vehicle. Crew it with some spare drivers or technicians, or even any infantry other than just the typical infantry squads. An important thing to note is, other than infantry and militia, pretty much every infantry squad in the game can actually drive basic vehicles. They can't drive tanks, but they can drive basic vehicles. So that's important, because at the end of any mission, when you've cleared out all hostiles on the map, it doesn't just end there. You'll have the chance to clear the map of any salvage you want. So make sure you search every nook and cranny, take every vehicle you can, take all the firepower you can find that's been dropped, because if you can get out with it, it could augment your own force, or you could sell it for additional goodwill points. It's a very, very effective way of improving your capabilities over time, both directly and indirectly. Now, it may come with additional fuel use as you need to move to the next settlement, but typically you can just sell the vehicles for goodwill points and then trade it for additional supplies anyway. So, like the supplies you're going to use, making sure that those vehicles get from settlement to settlement is going to be negated typically after you sell whatever it was you were paying the supply upkeep for, just for a day or two after a mission. Because vehicles are quite valuable. The more high-tech something is, the more valuable it is. This integrator's heavy technical is going to be worth more than, say, just a movement technical. I'm going to get a lot more goodwill points in general, which is quite damn helpful. So making sure you clear the map and pick it clean is extremely important. Another tip I would make is when you're starting a mission and you need to choose what your initial force is going to be, it's best to go with a relatively balanced selection in general, but always involve at least one heavy AT. whether it be your Bradley with a tow ATGM or an infantry anti-tank team, you need to make sure you got something that can deal with any nasty heavy surprises which are on the map. The battlefield is a very dangerous affair. It's even more so when you don't have the tools to deal with whatever is going to pop up and surprise you. So make sure you bring at least one anti-tank asset. It's extremely helpful. I really like bringing in typically a Founders ATGM squad early on, and then a Bradley with an ATGM later on, and other stuff even later on, but don't want to go into too many spoilers. For supply usage, one of the things I really heavily recommend is that you always keep a couple of days of supplies spare as much as possible, so you can deal with any circumstances which might arise, or opportunities as well. Because going from location to location, as mentioned earlier, always costs supplies, and as we can see here, I have basically no supplies remaining. Going to another location is literally impossible at this stage. And I can trade for additional supplies here after the mission.
Okay, how do you want that reward?
So I could go for 150,000 supplies here, which gives me, almost 3 days worth of supplies, which is very nice. But then I'm locked out of getting the additional goodwill credits or other rewards, which you may get offered later on in the campaign. So if you're only going for supplies all the time, that's potentially gonna limit some rewards, let's say, you might get, which are quite nice.
Supplies. Great.
So having a couple of days worth of spare supplies is always nice to have. I would always recommend trying to do so, and if that means running a leaner force, then I would recommend it. Always remember that, like I've done here, you don't necessarily need this many technician squads. In between missions, you can just get like your rangers or rangers or RPG squads, sharpshooters, etc., just to drive the vehicles instead. That would have a bit of an impact though. It means that you're potentially, it's going to be a bit awkward at scenario start, getting out of the vehicles, so that those combat troops actually are performing combat the way that you want them to, and it's also gonna have a bit of an impact on, meaning that you then have to bring a vehicle in the first place in order to access said squad. So it's there's benefits and drawbacks to that method, but I think a leaner force is definitely possible. As we can see here, I have a lot of supply trucks from the previous mission, which is quite nice. I don't need all of these, and I would probably end up selling at least half of the vehicles I've got here. I literally took all the trucks I could find, the additional supply trailers which could potentially be sold. Probably the M113 here I would maybe sell, the Integrator's heavy technical. Maybe even disband a couple of the militia squads or something and merge the manpower into a different one. There's running a leaner force for better supply usage is quite helpful, and that's a decision you'll need to make during your campaign with T-Force. I think next up is making sure to repair vehicles. So, did I have one that was damaged here? I do. So vehicles can be repaired both in and out of battle, and it'll cost you supplies in order to do so. Although out of battle it's quite cheap, you're gonna want to make sure that you're always repairing in battle. Vehicles' capabilities degrade as they take damage to modules. So if a weapon has been taken out, you're going to want to repair it in order for it to be used again, as an example. So making sure that your vehicles are repaired, like if their track or wheel is taking damage, their mobility is going to be impacted. If they've taken damage on the hull somewhere, they're potentially going to be a bit more let's say, vulnerable to future shots inside the location, and you may well just lose it outright. So making sure the full effectiveness by repairing them is important. In order to do so, you can, at the bottom right, when you've got the vehicle selected in battle, make sure that you order them to repair. Now, spare parts, you only have a limited amount on a per vehicle basis during the course of a battle, but typically you need to make sure that you're using these spare parts to repair whenever possible. If you keep taking damage and you run over your spare part usage, maybe consider withdrawing that vehicle to a safer spot until the end of the battle and the hostiles have been cleared, because if you take more damage, you may well end up losing said vehicle. I think then the next thing really I want to make the point of is that some vehicles tend to be a little bit better than others. So let's take a look at the M113 APC that we've got here. Only has a 50 cal. This is a pretty basic one. It's not had any upgrades or anything. But the M113 is Vietnam era APC. It's quite dated by the time of Judgment Day. Never mind the future war we now find ourselves fighting against Legion. So this has someone who has to man the gun. It can have quite a few troops transport in it with the 11, sure, but it's quite slow. It has the gunner vulnerable, and it's not exactly the most survivable. If we compare this to, say, the Striker that we have here, so the Striker has a turret which is unmanned. The gun up there, the gunner doesn't have to expose himself at all. So he can just keep shooting. Now, you can still lose crewmen, but it's far less likely to happen. It needs something a bit bigger in general. A stray shot isn't just going to take the machine gunner out anywhere near as likely anyway. It's quicker. It's a little bit more survivable, for sure. And then it can only take one less passenger. So you're going to need to decide what you keep, but a tip to make is that some vehicles just aren't particularly great. I would say typically the M113 you're going to want to phase out ASAP, and probably just keep Strikers for moving your troops around the battlefield as much as you can. It's going to take a little bit of time to find enough of them to fully replace M113s, but at 1,650 upkeep in terms of supplies, I'd say it's probably not worth taking one of these in general. Anything which it can do, other units can do better. I mean, sure, it can have something like a mounted ATGM put on top of it, but so can a Humvee, and a Humvee is cheaper and quicker. So I think then that's pretty much everything here. Anyone have any questions before the end of the stream? The AP ammo, the cartel tank overpens 78% of the time, so they can decrew almost every car. That's also quite a useful tip, yeah. That's true, Cow. Filing, thank you very much for that sub. Apologies, I was so focused on monologuing that I didn't see chat there, but thank you for that. But yeah, if anyone has any quick questions just before we end here, I'll answer them as best I can. Because I think we've pretty much covered everything here. So just as an overview, there is going to be a accompanying article which covers all the points we've gone over today. And that'll be coming out on the Slithering website, I believe in a couple of days' time. So this is just kind of a companion to that, a video piece to go with it. And there's going to be more to look forward to. So there'll be another one next month. And then I think it's 3 more. There's one a month over the next few months. So there's a lot to look forward to, and we'll be covering many of the different aspects within Terminator Dark Fate Defiance, which you'll encounter over the course of your campaigns. In terms of the schedule then, over the next few days, just very quickly. There's been a couple of changes, so I just need to make sure I got the correct one here. Let me just bring this up. What are we on? 28th. Alright, so there's not going to be any streaming tomorrow as far as I'm aware, but Thursday is going to be tea time as normal. Then at 4:30, so that'll be at 4 PM. 4:30, Hexaboo is going to be doing some Field of Glory Kingdoms. 6:30, I'll be doing some Panzercorps 2 with the chess maps update. Friday is going to be Headquarters World War II with Richard York at 6 PM. Terminator Dark Fate Defiance, a game of 1745 at 8 PM. And then Panzercorps 2 Frontline Bulge with XTRG at 10 PM. Saturday, there should be a Field of Glory Kingdom stream with myself at 4 PM, I believe. There's nothing on Sunday. Next Monday is going to be Flashpoint Campaign Southern Storm with Sergeant T-Dog at 4:15. Rule the Waves 3 with Hexaboo at 6:15. And then Combat Mission, once again with Hexaboo, I believe, at 8:15. Next Tuesday is going to be Field of Glory Day, so there's a lot to look forward to on Field of Glory Day next week. But in terms of streams, so Das Tactic will be doing some Field of Glory Kingdoms at midday. Sergeant Z-Dog will be doing some Field of Glory 2 at 2 PM. There's going to be a special developers event at 4 PM, and that'll be for 2 hours, so there's a lot to look forward to there. Richard York will be doing some Field of Glory Kingdoms at 6 PM. Gamer 1745 will be doing some Field of Glory 2 at 8 PM, and finally XGRG will be doing some Field of Glory 1 at 10 PM. So there's a lot of Field of Glory next week if that's your jam, and that'll be next Tuesday. Next Wednesday is going to be a Strategic Command World War II War in the Pacific preview with myself. That's going to be at 6... actually, I'm going to start out one early. I'm going to be at 5 PM. And I might be doing some Field of Glory Kingdoms before that for a few hours as well. Next Wednesday, 8 PM, is going to be Field of Glory 2 with Richard York. Then next Thursday is tea time as normal again. So there's a lot over the next week and a half to look forward to. There's a lot of streams. I'll have them all up on the Twitch schedule over the next couple of days, once everything's been completely confirmed. And in terms of Terminator Dark Fate Defiance, there's going to be a lot to look forward to with Terminator as well, both with myself and other streamers. There's plenty of content to look forward to, and I'm going to try and do a full playthrough of the campaign for you guys at some point soon as well, in order just to have fun seeing what sort of builds I can make. I really want to try going through a game where I just use the Abrams, but either just with the standard heavy cannon or something like the heavy rotary 30mm, instead of just going for a heavy plasma. So there's a lot of interesting possibilities, and I want to explore them in a future run at some point. But that's going to be it for today. A huge thank you to everyone for tuning in. Like normal service will be resumed tomorrow, not tomorrow, the day after, and we'll see you then. But thank you very much for tuning in. This has been a very fun stream, just outlining some of the key mechanics which are integral to your Terminator Dark Fate Defiance campaign, and I look forward to exploring them more again in future. So just a huge thanks to Slytherin for letting me do this and having me. And a huge thanks to everyone in chat for watching and listening and for all the questions. It's been fun interacting with you all. I hope you have a lovely rest of your evening. We will see you next time. Thank you very much for watching.